2 days after my wedding, my new stepson walked into my house with a lawyer beside him. He did not come to congratulate me. He came with papers. "Mr. Bennett," he said, placing a folder on my dining table, "we need you to sign these." I looked at the folder. Then I looked at the lawyer. Then at my new wife, Margaret, who stood silently behind her son. I was 71 years old, a retired aerospace engineer. And as far as everyone in that room knew, I was a quiet old man living on a modest pension. But they were wrong. Very wrong. Because hidden behind a carefully protected trust was a fortune worth $64.8 million. And the man standing in front of me was about to make the biggest mistake of his life. My name is Harold Bennett. For most of my adult life, I designed guidance systems for aircraft and experimental spacecraft. I never cared much about luxury. I drove an ordinary car, lived in the same comfortable house for years, and rarely talked about money. But 30 years ago, I created a small technological improvement that changed everything. The patent was licensed to several aerospace companies. The payments kept coming, year after year. I invested quietly. By the time I retired, those investments had grown into a fortune. But I told almost nobody. Not my neighbors. Not old friends. And when my first wife, Elaine, passed away after 40 years of marriage, I became even more careful. Then I met Margaret. She was kind, intelligent, and completely uninterested in my financial situation. At least, that was what I believed. We dated for almost 2 years before getting married. I deliberately lived modestly during that time. I wanted to know whether she loved Harold Bennett, the retired engineer, or the man behind the bank accounts. Margaret never asked about my investments. She never demanded expensive gifts. She seemed happy with simple dinners and quiet evenings. So I married her. 2 days later, her son Derek came to my house. Derek was 43 and had spent most of his adult life chasing one business idea after another. A restaurant, a construction company, a cryptocurrency venture, a real estate project. Every one of them had failed. He was constantly looking for someone to finance his next opportunity. I had never given him money. That seemed to bother him. A few weeks before the wedding, Derek had visited our house while I was away. Apparently, he had seen a document on my desk. It was nothing more than a letter from my financial advisor. But Derek recognized the name of the investment firm. He started asking questions. How much did I have? What properties did I own? Did Margaret have access to my accounts? I answered every question with the same response. My finances are private. Apparently, that answer made him suspicious. Now he was standing in my dining room with a lawyer. Derek opened the folder. "These documents will make things easier," he said. "Easier for whom?" I asked. He avoided my eyes. "For everyone." The lawyer finally spoke. "My name is Victor Lane. Mr. Bennett, given your age and recent marriage, Derek believes it would be appropriate to establish a financial guardianship arrangement." I almost laughed. Guardianship. Derek leaned forward. "You're getting older, Harold. Nobody is saying you're incapable, but things can change quickly at your age." I looked at Margaret. She looked uncomfortable. "Did you know he was bringing a lawyer?" She hesitated. I knew Derek was concerned. Concerned. That was an interesting word. I picked up the papers and slowly turned the first page. The document would give Derek significant control over my financial affairs if I were declared incapable of managing them. I placed it back on the table. "No." Derek's expression changed. "You haven't even read everything." "I've read enough." His voice became colder. "Harold, don't make this difficult." That was when I realized something. He wasn't asking. He expected me to surrender. He thought I was old. He thought I was alone. And most importantly, he thought I was poor. Derek stood up. "If you refuse, we'll have no choice but to consider whether you're still mentally competent to manage your assets." The room went completely silent. I looked at the lawyer, then at Derek. Finally, I smiled. "Before you do that," I said quietly, You should probably find out exactly what assets you're trying to control. Derek stared at me. You mean your pension? I leaned back in my chair.
No.
I paused. I mean the $64.8 million you've been trying to find. Derek's face went completely still. And that was the moment he realized he had been playing a game without knowing the rules. What he didn't know was that my money wasn't simply sitting in a bank account. 15 years earlier, I had created a trust. And buried inside that trust was a clause specifically designed to protect my fortune from anyone who tried to take control of me through a bad faith guardianship claim. Derek had just triggered it. He simply didn't know it yet. Derek stared at me as though I had just told him I owned a private island. $64.8 million, he whispered. I nodded. The lawyer beside him, Victor Lane, slowly closed the folder. For the first time since they entered my house, neither of them looked confident. Derek recovered quickly. That can't be true. It is. He turned toward his mother. Mom, did you know about this? Margaret looked at me, then at her son. No. Derek's expression hardened. You married him without knowing? Margaret nodded. I married Harold because I love him. Derek scoffed. Then why didn't he tell you? I answered before she could. Because I wanted to know whether you and your mother would love me without knowing what I owned. Derek shook his head. You've been lying to us. No, I said. I simply kept my finances private. He picked up the guardianship papers again. You still need someone to help manage all this. Victor cleared his throat. Derek, perhaps we should discuss this privately.
No.
Derek looked directly at me. We're already here. Then he made his second mistake. You're 71, Harold. Your judgment can be questioned. I smiled. My judgment is the reason you're standing here instead of walking away with what you came for. Victor looked uncomfortable. I reached into a drawer beside me and removed a small envelope. I placed it on the table. This was prepared 15 years ago. Derek stared at it. What is it? My trust agreement. Victor immediately became more serious. May I see that? I handed it to him. He read the first few pages. Then his expression changed. He continued reading. Derek watched him. What? Victor didn't answer. Victor? The lawyer finally looked up. Derek, you should stop. Stop what? Everything. Derek laughed nervously. You're my attorney. Not if you continue with this. I watched Victor turn to a specific section of the document. The clause was simple. If anyone attempted to obtain control over my finances through a bad faith guardianship proceeding, that person would be permanently excluded from receiving any benefit from the trust. Not delayed. Not reduced. Excluded. The clause had been written years before I met Margaret. It had nothing to do with her. It had nothing to do with Derek. It was simply protection I had put in place after watching wealthy families destroy themselves over inheritance. Derek's face became pale. So what? Victor looked at him. So if you continue this guardianship attempt, you could disqualify yourself from anything Harold intended to leave you. Derek's voice dropped. But I'm not his biological son. Exactly, I said. He looked confused. You're my wife's son. You have no automatic claim to my estate. The room became silent again. Derek slowly sat down. All his confidence had disappeared. He had walked into my house expecting to intimidate an elderly man. Instead, he had accidentally revealed exactly why I had kept my fortune private. Victor closed the folder. I strongly advise you to withdraw these papers. Derek looked at him. You're serious? Completely. Derek turned toward Margaret. Mom, you're going to let him do this? Margaret's eyes filled with disappointment. Derek, you brought a lawyer into my husband's home 2 days after our wedding and threatened to have him declared incompetent. I was trying to protect you. No, she said quietly. You were trying to protect yourself. Those words seemed to hurt him more than anything I had said. Derek stood. I didn't know. I know, I replied. He looked at me. For a moment, I almost felt sorry for him. Then I remembered the papers he had brought into my home. The accusation, the threat, the assumption that because I was old and quiet, I was helpless. I wasn't. I had simply never needed to prove otherwise. Victor gathered his documents. Derek, I'm withdrawing from this matter. You can't. I can and I am. He walked toward the door. Derek remained standing in the middle of my dining room. His entire plan had lasted less than 20 minutes. But the consequences would last much longer. Over the following weeks, my attorneys formally documented Derek's actions. The trust protections were activated. He was permanently excluded from receiving anything from my fortune. Margaret and I never celebrated his misfortune. We simply continued our lives. We traveled occasionally. We had quiet dinners. We spent time with friends. And I continued living almost exactly as I had before. The biggest difference was that Margaret finally knew the truth. One evening, she asked me why I had never told her about the money. I looked at her and said, "Because money can change how people see you." She took my hand. "I wish you had trusted me sooner." "I know," she smiled. "But now I understand." As for Derek, he eventually disappeared from our lives. Not because I chased him away. Not because I destroyed him. He simply learned that some doors close permanently when you try to force them open. I never needed to shout. I never needed revenge. I only needed to let the protections I had built years earlier do exactly what they were designed to do. Derek thought he was walking into the home of a broke, retired engineer. He walked out having discovered that the quiet man he underestimated had spent 15 years protecting everything he had built. And sometimes, the strongest response isn't fighting back. It's simply being prepared before anyone realizes they should have been careful.